Welcome to Contextualizing Feminist Voices, teaching with the Global Feminisms Project. This series is focused on teaching, pedagogy, and uses of the archive in the context of the classroom. Designed with a special emphasis on educators, in each episode, you will learn from instructors who have used the project's interviews in their courses, and about activities and resources for incorporating the archive into your class.
In a moment, I will be talking with Professor Shelly Grabe of the University of California at Santa Cruz, who will talk with us about how she uses the Global Feminisms Project archive in her teaching. Dr. Grabe's research examines socio-structural components of women's rights violations and social justice in the context of globalization. Can you just briefly describe the course you use the archive in?
Sure. The course that I most use the Global Feminisms Archive is a graduate seminar designed for a social psychology area. And that seminar is related to transnational feminism and psychology. The course is an advanced topic for graduate students. And so in those courses, we typically have between 5 and 8 students enrolled. And in the course that I offer, we read texts that help us examine how broad cultural ideologies linked to globalization, for example, impact women's human rights.
Great. And how do you use the material in the archive?
Well, in this course, I use the materials as a part of a requirement for a research paper. Because the course that I teach is an advanced course in social psychology, the students are required to produce a paper that allows them to reflect in depth about how social psychological research could make a contribution to a perspective or problem that was presented in the course. So I asked them to use the archive as a data source, but I start with just introducing the archive to them so that they know that there is an archive that documents individual life stories of activists and scholars, and that those stories as individual stories are rooted in particular historical and cultural contexts. So they, out of the gate, they know that the Global Feminisms Project is an archive that it records both differences and similarities in women's activism in specific sites. And the very nature of that presses us to consider what we mean by, quote, global, in particular when it comes to feminism, and whether or not that applies universally to women across all of the sites. So I want them to be familiar with the site and how the interviews have been conducted, how they've been processed, how they've been coded, how they're available. And once they have that familiarity, I ask them to use the interviews in a paper, and I give them some examples. So one example might be that they could do a cross-cultural comparison. They could look at, for example, at the influence of culture on how women are negotiating patriarchal norms or how they're engaging in resistance or resilience. Mm-hmm. They could also look at how social structures across cultures might inform women's activist or empowerment strategies. A couple other examples, they could look at similarities to see how similarities emerge across these different contexts and how women are engaging in feminist action. They could also look at generational shifts. So for example, I think Grace Lee Boggs in the US site may have been the oldest woman that we've interviewed. She's since passed, as have a number of other women in our archive. But students could look at generational shifts and see if women in those generations had a similar or different approach or laid groundwork for the younger generations. And then the last example I give them is considering comparisons across sites based on thematic analysis, because the Global Feminisms Project thematically codes all of the interviews, and that coding is available as an open access resource to people so they could do comparative studies based on themes.
Wonderful. And what do you think is most effective about the way you use the Global Feminisms materials?
Well, I think that using it in a graduate assignment is really powerful because a lot of graduate students go through their courses without any data available to them and not able to apply some of the things they're learning in class. So by providing the data, the graduate students in this case are not only introduced to principles employed in community collaboration, but they're also introduced to an alternative methodology. And then most importantly, or most effectively, they gain firsthand experience working with the data to form a research question and an answer.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any advice for others about pitfalls to avoid in using the Global Feminisms materials, or any difficulties to watch out for?
If I'm being honest, I've never identified any pitfalls. And that may be because I'm biased. I've participated in collecting interviews for 2 of the sites. But collectively, the archive hosts, in an extraordinarily organized way, a rich open access resource for teaching and research. So if folks are interested and they feel intimidated or they aren't quite sure how to translate that work into their classes, it's not just that the archives have the interviews available, but they also have open access resources to lesson plans or sample syllabi for both undergraduate and graduate courses. So there's loads of resources and tips for how to use this material. So I haven't identified any pitfalls yet.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast, and continued thanks to Dr. Shelly Grabe, whose ongoing engagement with the archive and its materials has been to the benefit of so many. We hope you found her wealth of experience useful, and will check out some of our other podcasts about people's uses of the Global Feminisms Project materials in their teaching.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Contextualizing Feminist Voices, Teaching with the Global Feminisms Project, a podcast created by the Global Feminisms Project. The entire team hopes it will help you understand and incorporate the materials on the website into your class. If you liked this episode, check out the other podcasts in the series, as well as materials about countries, teaching resources, and interviews on the website.